Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I hope you had a great weekend. We're still looking at the skies and hoping for more rain. We're getting little bits of drizzle, but not much more. The IMF, in their World Economic Update, are talking about how Africa has to create enough jobs to absorb 20 million new entrants to the labour markets each year. They're saying the economic recovery is set to continue, but duality persists. Some 21 countries are expected to sustain growth at 5% or more in 2019. The remaining countries, mostly other resource-dependent economies, including the largest, Nigeria and South Africa, are set to face sluggish growth in the near term. African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement will establish a market of 1.2 billion people with a combined GDP of $2.5 trillion. I addressed this whole thing in an Al Jazeera Inside Story, which was hosted by Martine Dennis. That link is there as well. Let's go to Sudan. The coup makers are in disarray, said Alex Dewal, Tufts University. Al-Bashir set up an elaborate political security system that only he was capable of running. And now they're struggling with the conundrum of how to maintain consensus among a divided and militarized elite and meet enough of the demands of the protesters to have a modicum of legitimacy. Sudan's Defense Minister Awad bin Auf said on Friday that he is stepping down as the head of the country's Transitional Military Council. That just took about 24 or 36 hours. And that General Abdel Fattah Abdul-Rahman Burhan will be the new head of the transitional military. He said he was going to be there for 2 years and he was gone in less than 36 hours. Citizens at the sit-in are asked what their demands are. The transfer of power to a civilian government is what they responded. I like this from B. Son Blas. The sit-in site looks like a portal into tomorrow's Sudan. Took me back to Don DeLillo, but what about the crowd? The future belongs to crowds, you wrote in Mao too. Then about the street, about how the revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form in the street. And then quoting, if the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over. Each Sudanese military council leader is trying to send them home. They're not interested, and you know why. Can protesters stay organized and sustain their movement? What would a civilian-led transitional process look like? This is Africa ACSS. Will the military use force against the protesters? The military will have to decide whether to remove the protesters by force or seek some sort of compromise, which takes me back to something I was asking after the events in Ouagadougou in 2014, when I said, we need to ask ourselves how many people can an incumbent shoot stone cold dead in such a situation? 100, 1,000, 10,000? This is another point. There is a threshold beyond which the incumbent can't go. Where that threshold lies will be discovered in the throes of the event. I'm still fascinated by this lady, Ala Saleh, who really has become a 21st century African revolutionary icon. I also tweeted that lots of folks from the Kremlin to the UAE to Saudi Arabia who are bankrolling Haftar's dash for Tripoli to Turkey and Qatar, many points in between, have their irons in this Sudani fire. And I wonder who will bet on the future, which is the street. To that point, Middle East Eye says, what a strange lineup in Sudan against People's Power. Sudanese spy chief met head of the Mossad to discuss Bashir's succession plan. That plan came undone. Europe could also face a threat to its energy security, given that Algeria provides a third of the gas consumed in Europe and as much as half of the gas consumed in Spain. This is President Felix Antoine Tshisekedi en route to Lubumbashi, flying coach class. He's really hitting the spots in terms of the way he's presenting himself. We want to suspend the export of mealie meal and maize until we take stock of what we have in terms of food security. This is President Lungu. This speaks to the worries that are here as well about the harvest. Africa's booming cities are running out of water. The tap flows once a week and usually at night, so we stay awake to fetch what we can store. Kabuki, 35, an interview in Accra. We mostly augment by buying water from tankers. Water use has risen about 1% a year since the 1980s, and more than 2 billion people now live in countries experiencing high water stress. Returning to Jumia, the shares popped as they started trading in New York, at one point soaring up to 75%. I think it closed at a market cap of $1.7 billion, or 1.9 billion. Recent investors, Pernod Ricard, MasterCard. As I said, the story is rising per capita incomes, increasingly young and urban population, falling internet and data costs, surging mobile phone penetration. These favorable long-term trends underpin the rise of the African online consumer. I think it's a buy. As I said, e-commerce and home-based deliveries changed the world from London to China. And I'm certain the same disruption is headed our way. That was last January. Jumia has 4 million customers in 14 countries. Its retail platform isn't profitable. Sales jumped by 40% in 2018 to 147.3 million. South African all shares up 10.75% year to date. Dollar versus rand, we are hugging just below the 14 level. Egyptian pound 17.3253. Egyptian stock market plus 15.6% year to date. Top performing market in Africa at the moment. Nigeria will have the world's third largest population by 2050. Without robust economic growth, that's a recipe for disaster. This is all about how there are more impoverished people in Nigeria today than combined in India and China. And saying one wonders whether a politician known as Baba Go Slow is up to the task. He isn't. Nigerian all share down 5.93% year to date. Passengers enjoying the air-conditioned comfort of the new train between Addis and Djibouti. Credit Marcus Vestberg for the New York Times. This is a photograph of the sunset over the limestone pillars of Lake Abe in southwest Djibouti. Again, Marcus Vestberg. And another photograph by him of the Harar spice market. Drifts of dried chilies elicited sneezes from browsing shoppers. He visits Dire Dawa, which is called the city of jinns, and he's talking about the hyenas. They emerge from the shadows to feed from the hands of people. Over the years, this nightly ritual has become a draw for tourists who gather to shoot photos under the beam of car headlights. But Emaj told us it also has a more supernatural purpose, to keep the dogs close because of the ghosts. The hyenas have their own entrances into the city, where they are said to be the only creature capable of seeing and swallowing jinns, spirits of Harar's past inhabitants, sometimes malevolent, who stalk the alleys under cover of darkness. Dome tents provide shelter for travelers at a campsite near Lake Abe. Marcus Vestberg again. In a striking speech delivered from deep below the ocean surface, the Seychelles president is making a global plea for stronger protection of the beating blue heart of our planet. President Danny Fauré's call for action, the first ever live speech from an underwater submersible, comes from one of the many island nations threatened by global warming. Fauré's speech says that this issue is bigger than all of us. We cannot wait for the next generation to solve it. We're running out of excuses to not take action and running out of time. I visited the Seychelles in November 2015. It's made up of 115 islands, lies 1,500 kilometers off East Africa, and has a population of 90,024. The smallest population of any independent African state. This is a photograph of the beach.